I think at this time we'd like to get started. We've got a busy program on tap this morning. One thing about the program, Coffee with Corn this morning, is we do not have the credits available today for this meeting. So you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured speaker for the day. We want to welcome each and every one of our Facebook viewers as well to Coffee with Corn. This is our winter meeting series that's brought to you by the Corn Marketing Program here in Michigan. My name is Terry Henney. I'm farm broadcaster at WSGW in Saginaw. Along with me from the Corn Marketing Program is our communications director, Angel Genio. Angel, good morning. How are you? You don't have to have your long johns on today.
Good morning. It's basically summer here, so I'm enjoying the warm up here.
Yeah. Now, Angel will be taking a look at the questions that you might be posting. If you're watching us on Zoom, on the Q&A down at the bottom of the screen, just put your cursor on that, click it, and there'll be a box, and you can make your question written out right at that time. As we're going through the program, don't be afraid to type in your questions as we go through the program. We'll be asking our speaker those questions after his comments are concluded. And again, as I said before, we don't have any credits for this particular one. So for many of you, you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy. We have the opportunity each and every Tuesday to bring a lot of really important, knowledgeable speakers to you. This is a great opportunity for each and every one of you to learn a lot about a number of aspects about agriculture and how we can help you to better produce your crop and market your crop. And by marketing the crop, give you the knowledge that you need as far as relations go with the United States and some other countries. And again, as I said, if you've got any questions at all, just click on the Q&A, or if you're watching us on Facebook, you can just type your questions in on the comment section, and Angel will be more than happy to field those questions and then ask our speaker at the conclusion of his address this afternoon. So Angel, if you're ready, I'm ready. And I think what I'd like to do right now is like to introduce this week's speaker, his name. And let me mark this down because Dr. Zhang, I think you are a busy man this morning. You got up bright and early for us. Dr. Wendong Zhang is with us this morning. And Doctor, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about United States and its relationship with some foreign countries. And I think in particular, you're going to be talking a little bit more about China. Am I correct on that?
Yes. So thank you, Terry and Claire, for the invitation. I'm really glad to join you guys this morning. Admittedly, this is before my regular getting up hours. So if I'm not talking, if I'm not making a lot of sense, maybe that's the reason. So hopefully that I am proud to say that I work at Iowa State, and more broadly, I'm probably one of the only extension economists across the nation who can speak Chinese. And now it seems to be, over the past few years, that seems to be one of the important skills to have. Today, I'm really happy to focus on one of the really critical relations between the US and China. And through the surging commodity markets, you can see again the significance of China in US agricultural exports, not only historically, but also even currently as well. So I will provide some of the context and also give you some update on some of the critical Chinese agricultural policy domestically there, but has implications on your operation and US markets, okay? So before I move on, I want to give you a little more background about myself. So as I mentioned, I grew up in China. More precisely, I grew up in a county in northern part of China. It's a rural county, but as I told many Iowa and Midwest farmers, it's a rural county with 1 million people. So my province has roughly the same size of Iowa. So it's the same size of Ohio roughly, okay? But rather than having 3 million people, it has 100 million people. And that's one of the reasons why that China becomes such an important market when we are looking at for when 20% of the U.S. agricultural product goes globally, and China being one of the major markets and often fighting with Canada for the #1 spot. So I have to apologize for this group that I graduated from Ohio State. So I at Iowa State since 2015, I work on mainly on two things. One is I lead the land value survey here. This is the annual survey that started in 1941. And we created a farmland portal. If you own land down here, you can find more information here. But for today's topic, we started a China Ag Center at ISU in 2017. We have been writing a lot about not only US-China trade war, but also China's corn policy reform, African swine fever and its hog recovery, phase 1 deal and Chinese purchase performance under the phase 1 deal. So I strongly encourage you to check it out. And some of the discussions that I will be making today will be based on some of the research I did with my colleagues there. I have one slide on the land values. I will put on the land value hat first to alert you that if you look across the Midwest for the land market, there has been a surging commodity markets, and more recently there are very optimistic signs and strong and more auction activities across Midwest as well. So the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago put out a quarterly survey of ag lenders every quarter, and the most recent one that is released this month have shown that over the past quarter that Iowa land values have risen 6%, Michigan land values have risen 7%. How permanent these are, so if we think ahead a year from now, whether we will still see an annual percentage change of 5 or 7%, I think that still remains to be debated, but I think there's no doubt that the market is really strong and it's in an upward trajectory, probably in a modest range, thanks to, in part, that the Federal Reserve had drastically cut interest rates, the record level government payments, but also more recently for this quarter, this is in light of the surging agricultural commodity markets that is thanks to surging exports to China, okay? So to set the stage, I think it's important to talk about what is the context we're in before we dive into the trade relationship. We need to remind ourselves that US and China political relations is probably one of the really critical one, and that will be also increasingly intertwined with trade as we've seen over the past few years. So recall about 3 years ago, that early spring in 2018, when the US-China trade war broke out, and by the way, which is still going on, that we still have significant tariff imposed on both countries that hasn't been lifted off. But back in the day, that the trade issue has been one of the major sore points between the two countries. But unfortunately now, fast forward to 2020, we have seen the quick deterioration in bilateral relations in many fronts, that we have issues in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, South China Sea, intellectual property issues, and political bickering on COVID-19 origins and the best way to control COVID-19. And almost all the normal communication channels a year from the last year was closed, in part due to the pandemic, but also in part reflecting the deteriorating bilateral relations. So when you are thinking about a couple months ago, the only viable communication channels between the top officials across US and China is the somewhat scattered assessment and renegotiation on the performance of US-China Phase 1 deal. So suddenly the trade become changed from the starting point of the tensions to the calming spot between the quickly deteriorating US-China relations. Okay, to make sure that you're still with me, so Claire, can you pull up the first poll? So the first poll is related to President Biden's remarks, and in his first speech at the to the State Department, he defined China as the most serious competitor to the U.S. in his first foreign policy speech, talking about that U.S. needs to take on directly to the challenge posed by China on the property, security, and democratic values raised by Beijing, which is the capital of China. So I have the poll up and asking you, to what extent do you agree with President Biden's assessment on the role of, or the definition of U.S.-China relations? Okay. Great. Can we see the poll results? All right. Okay. Okay, great. So we have 44% strongly agree, 36% agree. So that's 80% of the people agree or strongly agree with President Biden's assessment, and 20% neither agree nor disagree, right? So that's really meaningful, and I think that that shows that both countries have, when you are thinking about political leadership and business leadership, there has been a shift in the redefinition of China as part of the U.S.-China relationship. Two decades ago, China was more defined as a possible friend who occasionally caused troubles, right? But it's not necessarily widely viewed as competitors on many fronts. But I think this is now the consensus, as we've seen from the poll, as well as across the aisle, across the business leaders, that's the definition. From China's side, China is also thinking that the change of administration since the last election doesn't necessarily change the nature between the bilateral relations as well. That they're also expecting, probably will also see some possible tensions over the next decade too. I will get into that in more detail later on. Okay, but all right. So going to thinking about U.S.-China agricultural trade. Here is a busy chart, but it shows you some of the conditions on the stage we're in. So first, I want you to pay attention to several of the lines. Here, the first line you want to pay attention is the green line, which is the U.S. agricultural exports every month in 2017. This is really useful because this is the baseline year for the Phase 1 deal signed about a year ago. So this is China, this is the baseline year. China bought about $22 billion of agricultural products, with half about being soybeans. And we're speaking for Michigan corn. So when you're looking at in 2017, there's not a whole lot of corn exports to China. Okay, so what China promised is this line, the black line here, black dashed line. Okay, so this is the Phase 1 deal target. The Phase 1 deal target, essentially China pledges to buy $12.5 billion more compared to the 2017 baseline in calendar year 2020, and $19.5 billion more in 2021. So rather than pledging to buy $22 billion, China pledges to buy about $36 billion in 2020. So how China has been doing is showing in a red line, okay? In the red line here, you can see there's a gap between the green line and the red line that shows that when China was battling with COVID-19, especially for the first quarter, they're significantly hindered in their ability to go out to the global market to buy products. And however, what we have seen, the surging export markets and the surging commodity prices are largely thanks to surging exports to China that's showing in the red line since July. So since July, there are tremendous growth in Chinese purchase of a lot of the agricultural products, including corn, and we'll get into more of the details. But essentially, when you're looking at these numbers for October and November, we actually saw 2 record monthly U.S. agricultural sales near or about $5 billion per month to China. So these are really significant growth that has led to tremendous agricultural commodity market reactions. If you think about this shows you the U.S. corn and soybean exports to all the countries, including China. This also give you some idea of how significant these increases are. So the green line shows you 2019, and the blue line shows you 2018. So, and red line shows you 2020. On the left, it shows you the corn export sales, and on the right is soybeans, right? So you can see that for both commodities, that red line is on top, meaning that the 2020 crop that we currently are selling through the advanced sales and direct purchases has already significantly exceeded the levels of 2018 and 2019. If you look at soybeans, for example, just half of the marketing year we're in, that we already sold more than the entire years in 2018 and 2019. And you can also see the tremendous purchase, especially more recently as we enter 2021. So when you are thinking about the growth, all the growth in corn and soybean export markets, China accounted for half of the U.S. export growth and for corn, and 90% of the export growth for soybeans. So China is really the significant driver of the commodity prices, in addition to some of the production and weather concerns in South America. I know that Mr. Snodgrass has also spoken at your Coffee with Corn as well, right? So. But another factor that is really interesting is when you are thinking about why China is buying so much more in the latter half of the year is in part also due to their hog rebuilding efforts. So many of you must already know that China was hit in 2018 August with African swine fever, which wiped out 40% of their hog herd. So the reduction is larger than the entire U.S. hog inventory, right? So following that, they have done a tremendous job in rebuilding the hog herd. So as part of that, they pushed the domestic prices really high. I will show you more details down the road. But eventually, through this rebuilding of the hog herd, showing in the right graph, that they need much more feed grain, so that's led to a significant need for corn, soybeans, and sorghum as well. But at the same time, they are still at least 10% falling short in terms of their meat production capacity, as pork being the major meat item in a Chinese diet. So they're still facing meat shortages. which led to tremendous growth in the meat exports to China as well. So let's dive in. And so if you look at one of the reasons why they're buying so many corn and pork from the U.S., this is the domestic Chinese piglet, sow, pork, and corn prices. So let's look at the corn prices for now. So this line shows you the corn prices, right? So, and you can see how significantly they're rising over time, and notice the price tag. Now they're about $11 per bushel, domestic price tags, right? So when you are thinking about the corn prices, they're really significant and has been really high, in part due to the higher production cost, but also that more recently, this is corresponding to the growth of the hog rebuilding, where this is pushing up the piglet prices, which is showing in green, and also showing in the pork prices that has been rising significantly over time after the African swine fever roughly broke here. Okay, so August 2018, since August 2018, you can see a tremendous effects on the hog and corn markets. More recently, if you look at, for example, in 2020, that these prices, these domestic prices have risen to really, really high levels, and that caused a lot of economic incentive to go to the global market to buy cheaper products, and the U.S. being one of the major suppliers. So why I'm talking about this? Because that I will show you the purchase, and likely this year, President Biden's administration might come up with a report on China's performance on the phase one deal. Politically, you will likely see all the export growth could be attributed to the phase one deal. So I just want to point out there are some economic fundamentals that is driving a lot of those shifts as well. So as another case in point, that in June and May, China actually bought record level of soybeans from Brazil, for example, because of the COVID-19, the Brazilian currency fallen by 20% in 2020 in the spring, so which made their crops much cheaper. So when you are thinking about Chinese importers, they do respond to market forces and market price, market signals as well. So in terms of before we go on and look at some of the more specific commodity specific recovery, there's an interesting question, and I can look at that when you are looking at the hog rebuilding herd, right? So these shows you the hog inventory and the sow inventory, and this is a slaughter level. So what are essentially Chinese government is saying that China has already reached 90 or 92% of the pre-African swine fever levels. So they have done a lot of growth, but when you are looking at the prices, if you have much stronger hog recovery, that typically should lead to more slaughters and more inventory should lead to a downward pressure on the prices. But in the market, you actually don't see a whole lot of those. So people start to question how reliable these official statistics are to assess how much you trust the Chinese official statistics. Claire, can you pull up the second poll on what you think that Chinese government assessment on the hog inventory statistics, that they are actually back at 90 to 92% of the pre-African swine fever levels. So what do you think the current hog inventory level, what's your guess? Great. Can we close the poll and see the results? Okay, great. So the dominant choices is 80 to 85% of the pre-African swine fever levels. And there are some split opinions in terms of whether it's followed by less than 80%. I think my vote will be maybe similar to 80 to 85, or maybe so my vote is probably around 85. Probably I'm a little more optimistic, but it's still that meaning that they still have at least looking ahead for this year, there are still needs significant feed grains demand. So I think the corn demand for this year will still remain strong. So is the meat products as well. Although we have seen some slowing down in terms of the pressure, so we are not seeing as strong as the year 2020 as well, right? So what are some of the numbers? My colleague Dermaheus and the postdoc Xi have written a policy brief that I encourage you to check it out. But essentially, we have looked into the commodity-specific Chinese agricultural imports under the Phase 1 deal and comparing that with the benchmark, which is 2017. So showing here is the, if we look at corn, okay, corn in 2017, there's about, so 160 million exported to China in 2017 for the entire calendar year. But in 2020, there are tremendous growth in Chinese corn demand just by that measure. That is, we're closer to about $1 billion of exports for just the calendar year 2020, not accounting for the additional advance sale that is purchased by over the past 2 months, for example, right? And what is more important, it probably is that U.S. is also capturing a bigger market share increase from 27% to almost 40%. And when you are looking ahead, also what are some of the tremendous growths are showing in pork, beef, and poultry, right? So the pork, beef, and poultry, especially beef and poultry, are seeing tremendous recovery and much significant growth. Remember that U.S. beef is finally allowed to go back to the Chinese market until didn't get into the market since 2017, not until 2017, right? So this is the calendar year 2020. So a more when you are, what is really significant is if you look at just the total quantity, China only bought $27 billion. And what is their promise again? So it's about 35. So if you strictly follow the Phase 1 deal text, they haven't fulfilled this purchase target. However, there are some maybe wiggle room in how you count the Phase 1 deal year one, because the year one Phase 1 deal was signed in January 15th in 2020, didn't become effective until February 15th. So if you count the year one starting from almost exactly a year ago to currently, and then because the China's significant purchase and the pace more over the past few weeks, there has been tremendous growth. And rather than buying $1 billion of corn, China bought almost $4 billion of corn through either the finished purchases and also advanced sales of the 2020 crop, but also increased their purchase of the soybeans to about $14.5 billion compared to about $12 billion in 2017. There are $2 billion of sales of pork, which is tremendous growth, and also dramatic increase in terms of beef and poultry as well. So what is the most surprising is the Chinese corn imports. So I think that that this one is one of the things that if they are purchase, if there are negotiation between the two administrations, between U.S. and China, this is one of the things that probably more clarity and transparency will be tremendously helpful, because that if you just look at the actual purchase numbers, that the China will about import from the U.S. 17 million metric tons. So they have a thing called the TRQ. Okay, so tariff rate quota, TRQ. Okay, so TRQ, meaning that if you buy less than 17 million metric tons, so if you buy less than 7.2 million metric tons, you don't have to pay really high duties. But if China buys more than 7.2 million metric tons, then Chinese government have the option. So they don't necessarily have to. So they didn't impose the tariffs, for example, last year, but they have the option to impose a 65% duty on the quantity that is imported beyond this 7.2 million metric tons TRQ. So this is the first major year over the past decade that China actually surpassed this TRQ. They almost never do. And likely for 2021, they're at least importing a total of 10 and 11 million metric tons for the calendar year of 2021 as well. So they will still have significant corn imports, but probably not as strong as we've seen over the past year. But what is also meaningful is when you are looking at, for example, if you count the quantity from February to February, we are likely to see the total quantity, total values of Chinese imports from the US will reach $35.8 billion, which is about the target prescribed from the phase one deal. So they have the chance to meet the phase one deal that is shown for the agricultural targets, right? So that's one of the reasons they're really ramping up the pace. One of the things I want to make, the comment I want to make is that when we are thinking about U.S.-China agricultural trade, that used to be a story about soybeans, that half of the values are coming from soybean sales. As we've seen over the past year, especially, we should really reconsider, especially since the trade war, we should really reconsider that we should strive for a more balanced portfolio that can achieve a higher quantity, but also a more balanced portfolio that benefit more commodities. As we've seen, there are tremendous growth opportunities for China in terms of the meat products, pork, beef, and poultry, but also other feed grains like corn, and also I would argue that when you are thinking ahead, there are tremendous demand for consumer-oriented retail products such as vegetables, fruit, and wine. So for example, avocado exports to China have grown 100 times over the past decade as well. So here shows you one of the things that if you look at, for example, this is a 2017 U.S. export to China, the Chinese purchase from the U.S. and other countries. So if you see yellow, that meaning that China is buying this commodity soybeans from the U.S. And if you see gray, that means China is also buying soybeans from other countries, mainly from Brazil and Argentina, right? So you see more gray color, meaning China buys way more soybeans from Brazil. But what is meaningful is when you don't see a whole lot of yellow, that meaning that China is buying from other countries, but not from the US. So that's the case for meat products here and the retail frozen products here, right? So the retail consumer products down below has tremendous growth opportunities. This in 2020, it's really hard to achieve because China has discovered coronavirus, it tested positive for the coronavirus on the outside packaging for many of the imported seafood packages or frozen vegetables and sometimes frozen pork. So they become much more cautious in 2020 in importing these products. So there is another commodity that is really significant. We'll discuss more, which is the ethanol. So there are some potential policy changes in domestic Chinese policy changes in China that could potentially bode well for the corn and ethanol exports as well. So, right, yep. So Holly has a question on the grain genetic research. I have slides later on pulling up exactly related to that, so I will touch on that a little more. I want to transition a little bit to talk about what is the US side attitudes, both from the farmers and my conjectures on what President Biden might do in terms of the trade policy, especially when it comes to China. So this is the Purdue University has Ag Economy Barometer. It's a nationwide producer poll, telephone survey of about 400 farmers every month. And on the left, it shows you how likely or unlikely do you think China will fulfill the food and agricultural imports requirement outlined in the Phase 1 deal. So since the election, that the farmers gradually become more pessimistic overall. So here is a less likely, right? There's a split opinion. So this is the share of people who think China will likely fulfill the food and agricultural imports requirements outlined in the Phase 1 deal is about at the 40 to 59% of the people. And on the right, they are more optimistic about 5 years down the road. We are likely maybe 57 to 60%. We are likely to find some new foreign export markets to American agricultural goods. So when you are thinking about one of the things I want to remind you is that I have told you that if we count the year one for the Phase 1 deal, rather than add the calendar year 2020, but change this from maybe February 2020 to February 2021, citing the influence of the Phase 1, the coronavirus, then we are likely to hit the agricultural targets. But what is the downside risk also for the commodity markets is that the gap for manufactured goods and also energy products purchases that is also part of the Phase 1 deal, it's really hard to make for China. So if you imagine that China, the Biden administration potentially releasing a report assessing the performance of China's purchases for the Phase 1 deal, later roll out this year, for example, there could containing some negative messages and saying China didn't meet the targets, at least didn't fully meet the target, that could send some downward pressure for commodity prices, affects corn and soybean prices. So if you haven't done so, I do encourage you to at least market some of your grain, taking advantage of this tremendously high prices that we're seeing in the market now. I want to mention another thing from the Purdue poll on farmers, that the farmers are also worrying about more restrictive environmental regulations, higher estate taxes, and potentially higher estate and income taxes under the Biden administration as well. So I believe I have another poll that is pulling up. That when you are thinking about President Biden's potential China trade policy, Claire, can you pull up this poll that I wanted to see your opinions? How likely do you think President Biden will renegotiate the Phase 1 deal or start the Phase 2 trade agreement negotiation with China in this calendar year 2021? while we are waiting, I will answer the question that Marv posted in a Q&A. So Marv asked, where does China sources meat products? So the most important meat products is pork. So before the African swine fever, China was able to produce 97% of the pork domestically. So they need the soybeans they imported from Brazil and the US to produce the pork in China. For the remaining 3%, they used to import a whole lot more from Europe, but really good for the US exports that our key competitor, Germany, was hit with African swine fever last October as well. So German pork was banned by China and Japan. So that also elevated US pork exports. Overall, when you are thinking about beef that China is mainly buying from Australia and Brazil as well. For poultry, they also have have a really large aquaculture industry as well. But pork is one of the major diets that accounts for 60% of the meat that Chinese people eat. So can we close the poll and see the results for the assessment on the phase 1 deal? Okay, so there's a split opinion. So the top choices, so it's about 50% think we're likely or very likely to see some renegotiation with China on the phase 1 deal or phase 2 trade deal. 14% said I don't know, and 35% said unlikely, okay? So I can give you my own conjecture, but let's set the stage. When you're thinking about the relationship between the two leaders, President Biden is no stranger with President Xi Jinping, who used to be who used to visit Iowa in 2012 and actually 1985, if you don't already know that. Why former governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, was chosen as the U.S. ambassador to China was precisely because that he was the governor when Xi Jinping visited Iowa in 1985 and in 2012, he was the same governor in Iowa. Though they have personal relationship, so is that President Biden was the Foreign Committee's chair in the Senate when China joined WTO in 2001. And he was also vice president when the current Chinese president was vice president visiting the US as well. I will go back to this, but when you are thinking about the potential trade policies, I'm probably more citing to the unlikely side for the previous question that we probably won't see much tariff rollbacks as we wanted to see. That because at least for two reasons. One is when you are thinking about the long laundry list for President Biden, including the COVID-19 vaccine rollout and the Paris Accord, Climate Accord, and fiscal policy coordination with other countries. The trade policy is not necessarily the top priority, and we likely won't see much actions, at least for the first half of the year. Likely, we don't necessarily see in year one this year for trade policies. However, I do think there will be more regular communication between China and the US. There will be probably more reestablishment of the regular channels. There are some interesting things that is happening in China that provided more nudge for US to reconsider various different trade deals. One of the things is that a couple months ago, China just signed a new trade agreement called the RCEP, the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, with 10 Southeast Asian countries: Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. So this is the largest trade agreement in terms of population and the economy. At the same time, Europe also struck major investment deal with China as well. So these have definitely created more incentive for the US, for example, to to reconsider rejoining the trade policy known as TPP, so now called CPTPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, so now led by Japan. So just a few purely from agricultural export perspective, rejoining TPP makes sense and definitely could boost the agricultural exports. When you are thinking about another thing that is you might so let me finish the discussion on the Biden's possible approach. When you are thinking about the U.S.-China relations, there might be some more collaboration. I think the first three is more likely. Probably the first two, especially. There could be one of the breaking point, one of the area that both countries could work together could be under climate change and under Paris Climate Accord, because China pledges to be carbon neutral by 2060, which also have implications for corn and ethanol exports as well, because ethanol is considered part of the renewable energy portfolio. There will be likely the reinstating the regular communication channels on economic and strategic issues. I'm hoping there will be less restrictions on visas for students and scholars, and hopefully there will be some coordinations in terms of global rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. There will be more fiscal policy coordination. If you think about the last crisis, global crisis in 2007, 2008, the financial meltdown, both China and the US actually worked together to try to jumpstart the global economy. Unfortunately, we see this global crisis have caused more troubles rather than more collaborations between these two countries. I'm also hoping that both countries will reconsider reopening the consulates in Houston, Chengdu as well, that were closed last year. And many China watchers in the US are also advocating for a 24/7 high-level hotline that the leaders could talk themselves. So during the Chinese New Year earlier this month, President Biden did call the President Xi Jinping. So that's view that has been favorably broadcasted and covered in Chinese media as well. There are also some uncertainties that, as I mentioned, there could be some reassessment of China's performance of the Phase 1 deal, which could lead to the conclusion that China didn't fully meet the target. For a Democrat, there could be more concerns about human rights issues related to Xinjiang, South China Sea, labor market issues and things like those. There could be new source of tensions. And I don't think there are a whole lot of easement regarding TAC-related, bilateral related investment and trade as well. Okay, so when you are, for the interest time, I will skip some of this. I want to, for the remaining 5-6 minutes, I want to touch on some of the long-term trends that why you need to care about China. So first, why China is such a big, important market for U.S. agricultural exports. One of the reasons is that they are a huge country with a lot of population, but also they are a country with limited resources. This is the Chinese map overlaying with the lower 48 states, with Iowa highlighted out, and also the star is not Beijing, it's my hometown. So it's in the same latitude with Kansas and Missouri, so it has been growing corn and has been growing corn and wheat as double crops for 1,000 years as well. So when you are thinking about the Chinese resources, commodity agriculture is not China's comparative advantage, because when you are looking at China, here Tibet, right? So here Tibet 12,000 feet or above. And in the northern part, there are a bunch of desert that's really make it treacherous for crops, livestock, and people to live there. If you draw a line between the northeast to southwest corner, 93% of the 1.4 billion people in China live east of this line. Okay, so that's in a shameless plug. It's like living in a cyclone-colored area. Okay, if you think about where things are in China, in the northeast, this is corn. Okay, this is corn. In the middle part, in my hometown area, here, it's a wheat country. In the south is rice. Okay, so this is rice. And when you are thinking about where the pork is growing, it's about in this red area. It's where the consumers are located rather than where the corn is grown. Okay, so one of the things that Holly mentioned in a question that China has. I want to remind you as well that China is a country of rapid change. One of the things, let's start with the agricultural stuff, that China just recently have invested heavily in the gene editing CRISPR technology. So they are also talking about that the chips for agriculture is the seed technology, or the major breakthrough needs to be made in terms of the efficiency and the productivity for the seed, both for crops, but also for livestock breeding as well. So those are widely viewed as there are more signs that China likely will moving towards commercialization of the GMO corn. And when you are thinking about, for example, one of the things that you need to watch is that the hesitation for Chinese government was that China cannot find Chinese domestic company who can really do well in the gene edited GMO crops. So but recently over the past 2 years, they have avoided several varieties that is created by Chinese companies, Dabeinong. So it's another Chinese company rather than so they are not necessarily against GMO. They just don't want this to be fully captured by the foreign companies, especially they are concerned about food security. Okay. Another rapid change is that before 2007, there's no crop insurance market. And now they are the second largest crop insurance market in the world. Before a decade ago, there's no agricultural drones. Now they have one of the largest and one of the best agricultural drone company, which can, later on, I encourage you to check this out, 2-minute YouTube video, which is applying a pesticide for thousands of acres, which might be owned by 1,000 farmers, but at the same time in the same township. Another example, drawing my own personal experience, that in 2009, when I left for the U.S., going from my state capital to Shanghai without the high-speed rail takes about 9 hours. The same route in 2016 with the high-speed rail takes about less than 4 hours, and over 80% of the miles are constructed over the last 6-7 years. So all these lines represent a high-speed rail that is built over the last decade. Okay, so even in my hometown area, I mentioned that my hometown used to be the wheat country, growing wheat and corn for 1,000 years, but now this is my uncle holding his grandson growing vegetables, much as Michigan growers as well, but this is high tunnel growing cucumbers and honeydews. And I want to end with 2 Chinese phrases. So the first one is here. So the first one is 美国, which is the name of the USA. Okay, literally meaning 美 meaning beautiful and 国 meaning country. literally the name of USA is translated into a beautiful country. So that you have to bear that in mind. That's symbolic of the underlying good feelings about the US. And the next phrase is Niu, which is the name of the Chinese New Year. If you don't already know, we're in a Chinese New Year that started in February, so around the Valentine's Day, and pronounced Niu. Okay, this is the year of the ox. So if you don't know that in Chinese culture, Niu, the ox is very hardworking and also symbolic of good fortunes as well. So with that, I also have some books to recommend. Claire can send you the slides. You can take a look. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Doctor, fascinating. A lot of facts and a lot of figures there, and we do have some questions that I want to have Angel give you. But I am fascinated with the construction of the high-speed rail. All of this just within the last 10, 12 years?
Yeah, so when I left in 2009, there's no high-speed rail. So all these are essentially built over the last decade, especially after President Xi Jinping took office in 2012. So all these dark blue lines are the one that is already finished in about 2 years ago, in 2017. All the light blue lines are the planned ones that will be finished by 2030.
Now, is this an initiative with all this infrastructure improvement top priority for the government?
Yeah, definitely. So because that you just look at this, and we sometimes forget how fortunate U.S. landscape looks like. There's literally no natural barriers between Michigan and Iowa, right? But if you want to go from Shanghai, to Sichuan, which are here where the panda is, right? There are a bunch of mountains separating here. So when you are thinking about where my classmates used to go, they have to go north to Xi'an, right? And then go south to Shanghai. It takes about, this roundabout is about 30 hours in a train. Not really fun, right? But now with a high-speed rail cutting through the mountains, the trip has been cut to 6 or 7 hours.
Interesting. Well, we have a couple of questions.
That is something else.
In the Q&A that we didn't get to just yet. Darren wanted to talk about the quantity and quality of corn in China's domestic reserves.
Yep.
We've heard some kind of conflicting stories about that.
Yep. So unfortunately, I don't have the crystal balls of the corn reserves in China as well, because they regard this as a strategic secret, national secret. I do think that that's one of the things, if you are the commodity group leaders and you work with the administration, and in the negotiation, this is something that we need definitely more clarifications and transparency in how, for example, when do you trigger when you don't impose, or when you impose TRQ, and what are some of the what sort of the information you can publish about the reserves. There are concerns about, so the reports has been that the corn reserve has been low. So that's one of the reasons that commodity prices, domestic corn prices in China has been really high as well. But I don't think, I think there are also quality issues. Maybe they are 15, 20% are not necessarily good, but I think some of the media maybe overplayed the degradation. When you again, it's title of the slides, China is a country of rapid change, that they can do a lot of the things for, so if it's just the infrastructure, they can learn and invest in these and upgrades fairly quickly. So there's a question on potato imports. So potato imports so far is still not very, very significant because China is also a major potato producer as well. So especially in northwestern part of China, so they are a significant producer that way. And China doesn't. So the Chinese diet, we don't eat a whole lot of mashed potatoes at all. Fries are getting popular.
Well, we sort of touched on Holly's question about the upgrade in genetic research, but one of the sticking points in U.S.-China relations has been intellectual property issues.
Yep.
And she asked specifically how concerned we should be about those when it comes to genetic research into crops in China.
I think we should definitely be concerned about this. There are but we also need to remember that China has been making progress in this. There are new laws specifically banning the forced technology transfer. The implementation remains, how effective these are implemented remains to be seen. My mom works in a local county court. So almost 2 decades ago, there's no specialty intellectual property rights courts, and there are a lot more in China now, specifically doing that. There's also, you also need to know that when you are thinking about the development, a lot of the Chinese companies are investing heavily in these technologies as well. So it's sometimes so there are a lot of more researchers who are good researchers, and they're investing heavily in these technologies. So we definitely should be concerned about this issue, but we should not also, when we look at some technological advancements in China, automatically think this is stolen from other countries, because China has made significant technological advance, especially in these fronts. I noticed there are some. Right.
Well, that's all we've got in the Q&A.
Do we have any questions, Angel, on Facebook?
No, we've cleared through them.
So Ryan has a question on what are the slides with the picture of the spray drones. So
I shared the link to that in the chat. Oh. So if you want to watch that YouTube video, you can click that link over in the chat. I also shared the link to the policy brief that we spoke a little bit about earlier. So if you want to follow up on some of those resources, you can click on the links over in the chat.
Yeah, one more thing about the spray drones, that if you are, so you understand that average farm size in China is only 1 to 2 US acres. So there are 1,000 farmers in my grandpa's village, only 200 US acres to choose from in total, right? So, but this drone company essentially is a custom application, right? So even though this is owned by thousands of farmers, but they're from the same area, they're roughly growing similar crops. So the township can coordinate these application services, which is more efficient and cost saving as well, right? So those are some of the innovation that is happening. I think there is, right. But thank you very much for having me, and I can stick on for another few minutes if you have additional questions, but thank you very much.
I'm just kind of curious, Doctor, about the relationship, possibly personal relationship between our president and the chairman in China. You kind of indicated a little bit that they are well aware of each other and have had conversations in the past. So I guess it's not unusual then for our president to be talking for, as the media put it the other day, something like 2 hours with China regarding a number of different things.
Yep. So I do think that the personal relationship between top leaders, especially for such a critical relationship, is really important. And that what you have seen is that sometimes you need the private conversation that is in if in Camp David, for example, or in some other places where they can spend a whole day together talking about, without press, without aides, and talking about these issues more openly. But at the same time, I do think that there is a significant shift in the definition of U.S.-China relations. There are more stress and awareness of the strategic competitiveness between the relationship. But I think that both countries, from the China side, China is calling for, we need to come up with some list that what are some of the issues that we can work on together, including climate change. I do think that agriculture should be one of the things that China and the US will find mutually beneficial, because China really needs agricultural commodities from the global markets, and US is one of the cheaper and major supplier, right? So this is this agriculture should be part of the solution between the US and China relations. And at the same time, I think there also needs to be list on what are some of the things that are core interests that I hope that there's no discussion. For example, that Taiwan is definitely one of the key hot button issues that there's not a whole lot of negotiation room from China's perspective. But I think there are that the tremendous growth in terms of U.S. exports to China is also part of the. This is also China want to send goodwill messages to the new administration that China is willing to do good business and work with the administration to reset the relationship for a better trajectory.
All right, we do have a box up on the screen, closing poll, for those of you who would like to fill that out and let us know how much you've picked up on this, and if you enjoyed our conversation. I have today. Dr. Wendong Zhang, thank you very much for being a part of our program today. We really appreciate it, and hopefully our paths will cross in the future.
Yep, definitely.